Maria had always been stubborn. Even as a child growing up in Chicago, she would argue with her mother about wearing jackets in winter. Now, at 34, living alone in the mountains of New Mexico, that same stubbornness had become both her strength and her weakness. The remote cabin sat like a tiny island in an ocean of pine trees, 15 miles from the nearest town. Maria had bought it with the insurance money after the accident. The same accident that took her husband David and left her with a prosthetic leg that clicked softly when she walked. Across the wooden floors, she loved the silence here, no honking. Cars, no neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls. Just the wind through the trees and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Her graphic design business thrived in this peaceful setting. Clients from Los Angeles and New York never knew. She was creating their logos and websites from a one-room cabin that smelled like pine needles and wood smoke. Tuesday morning started like any other. Maria made her coffee in the old percolator, the same one David had insisted on buying at a yard sale 3 years ago. She could almost hear his voice saying, "Trust me, Maria, real coffee needs real brewing." She smiled at the memory, though it carried the familiar sting that came with thinking about him. Her computer showed 17 new emails. A restaurant in Santa Fe needed a menu redesign. A tech startup wanted to discuss branding. Normal work. Normal life. She was deep into sketching logo concepts when the weather alert popped up on her phone. Severe blizzard warning. Sustained winds 40 to 60 miles per hour. Snow accumulation 12 to 18 inches. Temperatures dropping to -15 degrees Fahrenheit. Maria glanced out the window. The sky looked gray but not threatening. She had lived through Chicago winters her whole life before moving here. A little snow never hurt anyone. She dismissed the alert and went back to work. By noon, the first snowflakes started falling. Big, lazy flakes that drifted down like feathers. Maria watched them while eating her lunch of canned soup and crackers. Actually, it looked kind of pretty. The weather people always exaggerated these things anyway. Last month they had predicted a major storm that turned out to be just a light dusting. She had everything she needed. The pantry was stocked with enough food for 2 weeks. The wood pile beside the cabin could last a month. The generator in the shed had been serviced just last fall. David had always been paranoid about being prepared, and some of his habits had rubbed off on her. The afternoon brought heavier snow. Maria had to turn on lights earlier than usual because the thick clouds blocked most of the sunlight. Still, she wasn't worried. The cabin had weathered storms for 40 years before she bought it. The previous owner, an old rancher named Joe, had built it to last. Around 4 o'clock, the wind picked up. It started as a gentle whistle through the eaves, then grew into something more serious. The pine trees outside began swaying in ways that made Maria pause at her computer. She had never seen them bend that far. The power went out at 5:30. Maria wasn't surprised. The electrical lines in this area went down if a squirrel looked at them wrong. She had learned to keep flashlights in every room and candles on standby. The generator would kick in soon, just like it always did, but the familiar rumble never came. She pulled on her heavy coat and grabbed a flashlight. The snow was already knee-deep around the cabin, and more was falling fast. The wind hit her like a slap, immediately numbing her cheeks. She had to lean into it just to stay upright. The generator shed was only 30 feet from the back door, but it felt like a mile. Each step with her prosthetic leg was a challenge in the deep snow. The artificial limb didn't have the same balance. And feel as her real leg, making every movement deliberate and careful. Inside the shed, her flashlight beam revealed the problem immediately. A tree branch, heavy with snow, had crashed through the roof. It had landed directly on the generator, crushing the control panel and fuel line. Gasoline smell filled the small space. Maria stood there for a moment, snow blowing through the broken roof, realizing what this meant. No power, no heat. No way to cook food or charge her phone. And the storm was just getting started. Back inside the cabin, she tried her cell phone. No signal. The nearest cell tower was 10 miles away, and storms like this always knocked out service. Her landline had been disconnected months ago. When she decided she didn't need it, the temperature inside the cabin was already dropping. Maria could see her breath in the flashlight beam. She added more wood to the fireplace, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. The cabin was too big to heat with just the fireplace, and she only had so much firewood inside. By 8 o'clock, the storm had become something she had never experienced. The wind wasn't just blowing, it was screaming. It sounded like a freight train that never passed. Snow wasn't falling anymore, it was flying horizontally, hitting the windows so hard she thought they might break. Maria huddled on the couch in front of the fire, wrapped in every blanket she owned. Her prosthetic leg ached in the cold. It always did when the temperature dropped, the metal and plastic components contracting differently than her flesh. She had learned to live with the discomfort, but tonight it seemed worse than usual. The reality of her situation was becoming clear. The storm was bigger than predicted. Much bigger. The temperature inside the cabin had dropped to maybe 50 degrees and it was still falling. The fire was burning through wood faster than she had expected. She thought about David. He would have known what to do. He had grown up in Montana, understood winter storms in a way she never had. He would have prepared better, would have had backup plans she hadn't thought of. But David wasn't here. She was alone, just like she had been for the past 2 years. Alone with a storm that was turning into something dangerous and a disability. That made everything harder. Maria pulled the blankets tighter and fed another log to the fire. Outside, the wind continued its relentless howling and the snow kept falling. She tried not to think about how much worse it might get or how long it might last. Instead, she focused on staying warm and staying calm. She had survived worse things than a snowstorm. She had survived losing her leg, losing her husband, learning to live completely differently than she had ever planned. She could survive this too. At least, that's what she told herself as the fire burned lower and the cold crept closer. The storm was just getting started, and Maria was beginning to understand that her stubborn independence might not be enough this time. Maria woke up shivering on the couch, her fire reduced to glowing embers. The storm outside sounded like a monster trying to tear the cabin apart. She checked her phone. 3 in the morning, and the battery was down to 15%. More importantly, the temperature inside had dropped so much she could see ice forming on the inside of the windows. This wasn't sustainable. She had maybe 6 hours of firewood left inside, and the woodpile outside might as well have been on the moon. Even if she could reach it through the storm, bringing in wet, snow-covered logs wouldn't help much. She thought about the Hendersons, old couple who lived about 3 miles east through the woods. Frank was a retired firefighter and his wife Betty had been a nurse. They had a big house with a backup generator and had told her months ago to come by if she ever needed anything. At the time, Maria had politely declined, insisting she could take care of herself. Now, that offer seemed like her only chance. Maria spent the next hour preparing. She put on every warm layer she owned. 2 pairs of socks, thermal underwear, jeans, a sweater, her heaviest coat. She wrapped a scarf around her face and pulled a wool hat down over her ears. Her prosthetic leg felt awkward with all the extra clothing, but there was no choice. She filled a backpack with water bottles, energy bars, and her phone charger, though she wasn't sure when she'd be able to use it. The most important thing was her walking stick, a sturdy piece of oak that David had carved for her during her recovery. It had gotten her through countless difficult days. By 5 in the morning, Maria stood at her front door, psyching herself up. The wind was still howling, but it seemed slightly less intense than it had been during the night. This might be her only window. She opened the door and immediately understood how wrong she was. The snow had drifted up to her waist. The wind hit her like a physical blow, nearly knocking her backward. She couldn't see more than 10 feet in any direction. Everything was white, swirling, disorienting, but she couldn't go back. The cabin was becoming a tomb. The first 100 yards were the hardest she had ever walked in her life. Each step required tremendous effort, pushing through snow that sometimes came up to her chest. Her prosthetic leg kept getting stuck, forcing her to use her walking stick to dig it out. The metal components were already getting so cold they hurt against her residual limb. Maria had walked this path to the Hendersons dozens of times during good weather. She knew every tree, every rock, every turn, but now everything looked the same. White shapes that could be boulders or bush. Dark shadows that might be trees or might be nothing at all. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, she stopped to rest against what she hoped was the big oak tree that marked the halfway point. Her lungs burned from breathing the icy air. Her legs, both real and artificial, ached from the constant struggle through the deep snow. That's when she realized she couldn't see the cabin behind her anymore. The panic started small, just a flutter in her stomach. But as she looked around and saw nothing but endless white in every direction, it grew into something bigger. She pulled out her phone, hoping GPS might work even without cell service. The screen lit up for a moment, showing her location as a blue dot in the middle of nothing, then went black. Dead battery. Maria forced herself to breathe slowly. Panic would kill her faster than the cold. She had been walking east, toward the rising sun, though she couldn't see the sun through the storm clouds. If she kept going east, she would eventually hit the Hendersons' property. The problem was, east had become a meaningless concept in the whiteout. She picked what she hoped was the right direction and kept walking. The snow seemed to be getting deeper, or maybe she was just getting more tired. Either way, each step was becoming a monumental effort. Her prosthetic leg was starting to malfunction in the extreme cold, not bending properly at the knee joint. Time lost all meaning. Maria fell twice, once when her prosthetic leg simply stopped working properly, and once when she stepped into a hidden dip in the ground. Each time, getting back up required enormous effort. The cold was seeping through all her layers now, making her fingers numb inside her gloves. She started talking to herself, something she had never done before. "Come on, Maria, just keep moving, one step at a time. David would want you to keep going." Her voice sounded strange and small in the howling wind. The trees around her looked wrong. She didn't recognize any of them. Had she taken a wrong turn? Was she walking in circles? The thought terrified her because she couldn't afford to waste energy going the wrong direction. When she stopped to rest again, leaning heavily on her walking stick, Maria realized she couldn't feel her toes anymore. Even worse, she was starting to feel warm, which she knew was a bad sign. Her body was shutting down non-essential functions to preserve core heat. She had been walking for maybe 2 hours when she saw the rock formation, a cluster of boulders that created a natural windbreak. She had never seen it before, which meant she was definitely off the path to the Hendersons. But right now, it looked like salvation. Maria stumbled toward the rocks, using her last reserves of energy to push through a final wall of snow. The shelter wasn't perfect, but it blocked most of the wind. She collapsed against the largest boulder, gasping. Her hands were so numb she could barely unzip her backpack, but she managed to get out a water bottle. The water was ice cold but not frozen yet. She forced herself to drink, knowing dehydration was as dangerous as hypothermia. The energy bars were frozen solid. She had to hold one inside her coat for 10 minutes before she could bite into it. It tasted like cardboard, but her body needed the calories. As she sat there, Maria tried to think clearly about her situation. She was lost, probably miles from any help. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Her phone was dead and nobody knew where she was. The Hendersons might not even know she was missing for days. Her prosthetic leg was barely functional now, the joints stiff from cold and moisture. Walking much further would be nearly impossible, but giving up wasn't an option either. Sitting here would mean slowly freezing to death, and she had too much to live for. Too many dreams unfulfilled, too many people who cared about her, too many reasons to keep fighting. Maria pulled her hat down tighter and wrapped her scarf around her face again. The wind seemed to be shifting, coming from a slightly different direction. Maybe that meant the storm was changing, maybe weakening. She would rest here for a little while longer, just until she got some feeling back in her hands and feet. Then she would pick another direction and keep walking. Somewhere out there in all that white, there had to be help. There had to be. The alternative was unthinkable. James Silverbird woke up before dawn like he had every day for the past 43 years. His grandmother used to say that the earth whispers its secrets to those who listen in the quiet hours, and old habits die hard. He made his coffee in the dark, listening to the wind that had been howling all night. The phone rang at 5:30 in the morning. "James, we need you." It was Carol from the County Search and Rescue Office. Her voice had that tight quality it got when things were serious. "Got a woman up near Copper Creek who hasn't been heard from since the storm started. Maria Rodriguez. Lives alone in that old cabin off Forest Road 12. James knew the area. Remote, difficult terrain even in good weather. With this storm, it would be nearly impossible to navigate. When was she last seen? Tuesday morning. Neighbor tried calling yesterday when the power came back in town. No answer. Tried again this morning. Still nothing." James looked out his window at the storm that showed no signs of stopping. Visibility was maybe 20 feet on a good moment. The temperature had dropped to minus 18 degrees overnight. Anyone caught outside in this wouldn't last long. "I'll be there in an hour," he said. James had been doing search and rescue for 15 years, ever since he retired from the Forest Service. Before that, he had spent 30 years learning every inch of these mountains. His grandfather, William Silverbird, had taught him to read the land the way most people read books. Every broken branch, every disturbed piece of ground, every change in animal behavior told a story. The official search and rescue team met at the fire station. 5 volunteers, all experienced, all worried about the conditions outside. The storm had been worse than anyone predicted. Roads were impassable. The helicopter couldn't fly. Even the snowmobiles were struggling in the deep powder. "This is suicide," said Rick, a paramedic who had been with the team for 8 years. "We can't see 10 feet in front of us. How are we supposed to find someone in this?" James understood the concern. He felt it too. But he also remembered something his grandfather had told him when he was 12 years old during his first real tracking lesson. They had been following deer tracks through fresh snow when young James complained about how hard it was. "Grandson," William had said, "the animals don't stop living because the weather gets difficult. The deer still need to eat. The rabbits still need shelter. People are the same way. When someone is lost, they don't disappear. They leave signs. You just have to know how to look." The team loaded into 2 trucks with chains on the tires. The plan was to drive as close to Maria's cabin as possible, then search on foot. James rode in the lead truck, studying a topographical map he had marked with colored pens over the years. Every water source, every natural shelter, every game trail was noted. The drive took 2 hours instead of the usual 40 minutes. Twice they had to stop and dig the trucks out of snowdrifts. The road to Maria's cabin was completely blocked half a mile from her property. When they finally reached the cabin on foot, James's heart sank. The place was clearly abandoned. Snow had drifted up against the front door. No smoke from the chimney? No signs of recent activity. Inside, they found evidence of Maria's departure. The fire had burned down to nothing. Her winter clothes were gone from the closet. A backpack was missing from the hook by the door. "She tried to walk out," said Tom, another team member. "In this storm, that's a death sentence." But James was already outside, circling the cabin, looking for tracks. The wind and new snow had covered most signs, but he found what he was looking for near the back door. A depression in the snow that was slightly different from the random drifts around it. The faint outline of footprints, almost completely filled in but still visible to someone who knew what to look for. "She went east," he announced. "Toward the Henderson place." The team looked at him like he was crazy. "How can you possibly know that?" James pointed to a bent branch on a small pine tree near the cabin. "Branch is broken about hip height. Fresh break, happened in the last day or 2, and look at this." He showed them a small piece of blue fabric caught on another branch. Same color as the coat hanging in her closet. "Could be from anyone," Rick argued. "Could be," James agreed. "But it's not." He had learned to trust his instincts over the years. More importantly, he had learned to trust the teaching his grandfather had passed down. The old man had been able to track a single elk through miles of forest, following signs most people would never notice. The team started following James east. From the cabin, the going was incredibly difficult. Snow up to their waists in some places, wind that made communication almost impossible. After an hour, 2 of the team members wanted to turn back. "This is pointless," Rick shouted over the wind. "She could be anywhere. We're going to get ourselves killed out here." James stopped and looked around. Something was bothering him, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Then he saw it. A tree branch that had been disturbed, bark scraped away as if someone had grabbed it for support. 20 feet away, another small piece of fabric. This one caught on a bush. "She came this way," he said with certainty. "James, be reasonable," Carol said through her radio. "The county is calling off the search until the storm passes. It's too dangerous." James looked at his team. All good people, all experienced in the mountains. But they were thinking like people who had warm houses to go back to. They were thinking like people who had choices. Maria didn't have choices. "You all head back," James said. "I'm going to keep looking." "That's against protocol," Rick said. "We don't split up in conditions like this. Protocol doesn't account for everything." James thought about his grandfather again. William Silverbird had lived through some of the harshest winters on record in these mountains. He had told stories about helping lost travelers, about the responsibility that came with knowing the land. "No one should die alone in the wilderness," William used to say. "The land connects all of us. When someone is lost, part of all of us is lost." It was more than just a search and rescue mission now. It was about honoring something deeper, something that connected him to generations of his people who had survived in these mountains by helping each other survive. The team argued for another 10 minutes, but James had made up his mind. Eventually, they agreed to give him 2 more hours. If he didn't find anything by then, he would have to come back. James watched them disappear into the white, then turned east again. The storm seemed to be getting worse, if that was possible. But he had something the others didn't have. He had been taught to see patterns where others saw only chaos, somewhere out there in all that white. Maria was fighting for her life, and James Silverbird had promised his grandfather, years ago, that he would never let someone face that fight alone. He pulled his hat down tighter and started walking into the storm. James followed the faint trail for another hour, reading signs that would have been invisible to anyone else. A broken twig here, a slight depression in the snow there. The storm was trying to erase Maria's path, but nature always left clues. For those who knew how to look, he found her walking stick first. The carved oak piece was half buried in snow near a cluster of pine trees. James recognized it immediately from his visit to Maria's cabin months ago when he had helped her fix a broken window. She had been proud of that stick. Had told him her late husband made it for her. Maria would never abandon it willingly. James's heart rate picked up as he searched the area more carefully. 30 feet from where he found the stick, he discovered what he was looking for and dreading at the same time. A set of rocks formed a natural shelter, and huddled against the largest boulder was a shape that could only be a person. "Maria!" he called out, but got no response. She was unconscious, curled into a ball against the rock. Her lips were blue, her skin pale as the snow around her. James had seen hypothermia before, and he knew she was in the advanced stages. Her body temperature had dropped so low that her system was shutting down, but she was alive. Barely, but alive. James immediately went into emergency mode. His grandfather had taught him traditional methods of treating cold exposure, knowledge that had been passed down for generations. But he also had modern training from his years with search and rescue. First, he needed to get her core temperature up, but he had to do it slowly. Warming someone with severe hypothermia too quickly could actually kill them. He pulled off his own heavy coat and wrapped it around Maria, then began building a more substantial windbreak using branches and his emergency tarp. "Maria, can you hear me?" he said, gently shaking her shoulder. "My name is James. I'm here to help you." Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused and confused. "David?" she whispered. "No, I'm James, from Search and Rescue." "You're going to be okay." James pulled out his emergency radio to call for help, but got only static. The storm was blocking all communication. The helicopter definitely couldn't fly in these conditions. Even if the rest of his team could somehow reach them, getting Maria out would require carrying her through miles of deep snow. He was on his own. James had prepared for this possibility. His backpack contained everything needed for an emergency. Overnight shelter, plus food and medical supplies. But Maria needed more than shelter. She needed to get to a hospital. And she needed to get there soon. That meant James would have to carry her out. At 6'2" and 200 pounds. James was strong enough for the job under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. The snow was waist deep in most places, deeper in the drifts. The wind was still howling at 40 miles per hour. The temperature was minus 20 degrees, and Maria, despite being unconscious, would need to be kept warm during the entire journey. James spent 20 minutes constructing a travois, a traditional device his ancestors had used to transport people and supplies. He used 2 long, straight branches as the frame, connected them with rope from his pack and stretched his emergency blanket between them to create a bed. It wasn't perfect, but it would work. Getting Maria onto the travois was the hardest part. She was completely limp, a dead weight that seemed to weigh twice what it should. James had to lift her carefully, making sure not to jar her too much. Sudden movements could cause cardiac arrest in someone with severe hypothermia. He wrapped her in both of their sleeping bags, plus every piece of spare clothing he had. Then he fashioned a harness from rope and clipped it to his belt. The travois would drag behind him as he walked. The first step nearly knocked him over, pulling Maria's weight through deep snow while fighting wind that tried to push him sideways was like trying to drag a refrigerator up a mountain. James made it maybe 50 feet before he had to stop and rest. At this rate, it would take him all day to reach the road, assuming he could even find it in the storm. Maria might not have all day. James closed his eyes and tried to remember everything his grandfather had taught him about endurance. The body can do much more than the mind believes, William used to say. Pain is temporary. Giving up is permanent. He started walking again. After the first mile, James's legs felt like rubber. The harness was cutting into his shoulders, and his lungs burned from breathing the icy air. Sweat was freezing on his face despite the cold. But Maria was still breathing, and that was all that mattered. The second mile was worse. James fell 3 times when the travois hit hidden obstacles or got stuck in deep drifts. Each time he had to check on Maria, make sure she was still wrapped properly, still breathing. Each time it was harder to get back up and keep going. By the third mile, James was hallucinating from exhaustion. He thought he saw his grandfather walking beside him, encouraging him to keep going. He thought he heard voices calling his name, though he knew it was just the wind. His GPS watch had died hours ago. His compass was fogged up and useless. James was navigating purely by instinct now, following what he hoped was still the right direction toward the main road. The storm seemed to be getting worse instead of better. Snow was falling so heavily that James couldn't see more than 5 feet ahead. The wind was so loud he couldn't hear his own breathing, but he kept walking, somewhere. During the 4th mile, James realized he couldn't feel his feet anymore. His hands were numb inside his gloves. His face was so cold it felt like it was on fire. He was experiencing the early stages of hypothermia himself. That's when he saw the light. At first, James thought it was another hallucination, a single yellow glow in the distance, barely visible through the blowing snow. But as he got closer, he realized it was real. A porch light. A house. James had never been so happy to see electric lighting in his life. He pulled the travois the final 100 yards, using reserves of energy he didn't know he still had. By the time he reached the front door, he was barely conscious himself. He pounded on the door with numb fists. "Help!" he shouted. "Medical emergency!" The door opened to reveal an elderly man in a bathrobe. "Good Lord!" the man said. "Get inside now." James had found help. After 18 hours in the worst storm in decades, carrying an unconscious woman through miles of wilderness, he had found help. Maria was going to live. As James collapsed on the stranger's living room floor, the last thing he saw before passing out was the man's wife calling 911 on their phone. The storm might have knocked Outcell towers, but landlines still worked. Help was finally coming. Maria woke up to the sound of beeping machines and the smell of disinfectant. Her body felt heavy, like she was wrapped in warm concrete. The hospital room was blindingly white after so much time in the gray storm. A nurse noticed her stirring and came over with a gentle smile. "Welcome back," she said. "You've been sleeping for 2 days. How are you feeling?" Maria tried to speak but only managed to croak. Her throat felt like sandpaper. The nurse gave her ice chips, which tasted better than anything she had ever experienced. "What happened?" Maria finally managed to ask. "You were found during the blizzard? A man named James Silverbird carried you 4 miles through the storm to get you help. You had severe hypothermia. Another hour and—" The nurse didn't finish the sentence, but Maria understood. The memories came back slowly. The cabin getting too cold. The desperate walk through the storm. Getting lost. Finding shelter by the rocks. Then nothing until now. Someone had risked their life to save hers. A complete stranger. "Is he okay?" Maria asked. "James, he's fine. Treated for mild hypothermia and exhaustion, then released. Yesterday, he's been calling twice a day to check on you." Maria spent the next 3 days in the hospital, recovering her strength and learning the full story of her rescue. The elderly couple who lived in the house where James had brought her, the Hendersons, visited her every day. They told her how James had collapsed on their living room floor, how they had called 911, how the paramedics had worked to warm both of them up. "That young man saved your life," Frank Henderson said. "In 40 years of living up here, I've never seen anything like it. He looked half dead himself, but he wouldn't let the paramedics treat him until they took care of you first." When Maria was finally released from the hospital, James was waiting in the lobby. He was a tall man with weathered hands and kind eyes, wearing a simple flannel shirt and jeans. Nothing about him looked like a hero from the movies, but Maria knew that's exactly what he was. "Thank you," she said, though the words felt completely inadequate. James looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Maria said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have turned back when it got dangerous. You didn't." They talked for an hour in the hospital cafeteria. James told her about his grandfather, about the traditional tracking methods that had helped him find her. Maria told him about David, about moving to the mountains, about her stubborn independence that had nearly gotten her killed. "Why didn't you give up?" Maria asked. "Your team wanted to turn back. The county called off the search. You could have died out there." James was quiet for a long time, stirring his coffee with a plastic spoon. "My grandfather used to say that the land connects all of us. When someone is lost, part of all of us is lost. I couldn't leave you out there alone." Maria felt tears in her eyes. After David died, she had convinced herself that she was truly alone in the world, that she had to handle everything by herself. But here was proof that she was wrong. Over the next few months, James and Maria became close friends. He helped her install a better backup generator and taught her basic wilderness survival skills. Maria discovered she had a natural talent for reading weather patterns and understanding animal behavior. "You're thinking like the land now," James said one day as they practiced tracking deer through fresh snow, "not fighting against it." Maria had never thought of it that way, but he was right. For 2 years after the accident, she had been fighting against everything. Her disability, her grief, her fear of depending on others. The storm had forced her to stop fighting and start surviving instead. 6 months after the rescue, James asked Maria if she wanted to join the search and rescue team. "Me?" she said, surprised. "I'm the one who needed rescuing." "That's exactly why we need you," James replied. "You understand what it feels like to be lost and scared. You know what people go through when they're in trouble?" Maria wasn't sure. At first, her prosthetic legs still gave her problems in difficult terrain. She worried about slowing down the team or becoming a liability, but James had an answer for that too. "Every person brings different strengths," he said. "You don't have to be the fastest or the strongest. You just have to care about helping people." Maria's first rescue call came on a warm spring day. A teenage boy had gotten separated from his family during a hiking trip. The official search had been going for 6 hours with no luck. Maria suggested they check the area near a small creek she had noticed on the map. "When I was lost, I kept thinking about finding water," she said. "If he's scared and thirsty, that's where he might go." They found the boy exactly where Maria predicted, tired and frightened, but unharmed. "How did you know?" the teen leader asked. "I remembered what it felt like," Maria said simply. Over the next year, Maria became one of the most valuable members of the search and rescue team. Her experience with disability helped her understand the challenges faced by elderly or injured victims. Her memory of being lost gave her insights into the psychology of people in crisis. But more than that, she discovered a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since David died. Every person they found, every life they saved, felt like a small victory against the darkness that had consumed her for so long. James and Maria made a perfect team. His traditional tracking skills combined with her intuitive understanding of human behavior. They developed a reputation for finding people other teams couldn't locate. "You two are like magic out there," Carol from the county office said after. They found a missing elderly woman who had wandered away from a nursing home, but it wasn't magic. It was something deeper. It was the understanding that no one should face their worst moments alone. One evening, almost exactly a year after the storm, Maria and James sat on her front porch watching the sunset. The mountains looked peaceful and welcoming, nothing like a hostile wilderness that had nearly killed her. "Do you ever think about that night?" Maria asked. "Every day," James said. "But not the way you might think. I don't think about how scared I was or how tired I got. I think about how it felt. When I found you, when I knew you were going to be okay," Maria nodded. She understood exactly what he meant. "My grandfather always said that helping others survive helps us survive too," James continued. "I never really understood what he meant until that night." Maria looked out at the mountains that had once seemed like enemies, but now felt like home. She thought about all the calls they had answered, all the people they had helped, all the times they had proven that no one has to face the wilderness alone. The storm that nearly killed her had also given her the greatest gift of her life. Not just James's friendship, but the knowledge that she was connected to something larger than herself. That her survival meant something, that she was never really alone after all.